everyone, and welcome to Fathoms Deep, a Black Sales podcast from Common Room Radio. I'm Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive, and we have with us a special guest today. Anna-Louise Plowman has come to visit.
Hello.
Welcome, Mrs. Hudson. Goodness, auspicious day.
Yeah, well, I hope so. It's lovely to be able to talk to you guys finally.
I know, it's so great. Okay.
It's always a delight. Anytime we get other little bits of insight and little stories, everybody's got their own version of what happened and what went down, and that's kind of the fun of it.
Absolutely.
I mean, it has been just such a treat for us, you know, that we love this television show and that we got to talk to each other about it, but then getting to talk to everyone else who's made it has been so much fun. So we're happy to talk to you now.
And also a really lovely group of people who made the show. So we were really lucky, and that's quite rare, I think, on TV shows to have such an incredible group of actors, creators, you know, team, crew. I mean, really lucky, special.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that. And yeah, our experience has been that every single person is delightful. You know, no pressure.
Yes. And everyone has said that same thing about everybody. Like, everyone was great. It was such an amazing project. I loved working on it. That's like the one show in my life I always remember. God, those times.
But, you know, usually on those sort of shows, you know, when everything is so great, you go, oh, gosh, it's going to be a disaster. Because often the shows that are a nightmare to film turn out to be brilliant. But, you know, we're lucky, you know, because we get a brilliant show and a lovely experience doing it.
That's right. So best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really wonderful. And you had a really interesting character. I wanted to start by asking you about her. Like I feel like Mrs. Hudson almost was in a class by herself. I'll explain that. I'll explain why I'm saying that. It's really interesting because most of the characters were kind of characters of Nassau. And then we had a few representatives of people who came from the world of quote unquote civilization in Black Sail speak. And Mrs. Hudson was very different than like the other two I classify that way, which is Miranda Hamilton Barlow and Woods Rogers. And
absolutely.
Unlike those two, Mrs. Hudson was of a different economic class, for one.
Yeah, she was. And the way I saw it, and the way, you know, when I first discussed it with John, was that, you know, she had been a woman who had more affluence prior to her husband dying. And then, of course, you know, at the time, you know, you have to go to work and go into service. And so that happened to a lot of women at the time. You know, if they were married and had children, they were supported. But, you know, back in those days, unless there was sort of family money from the wife's side, then you are, you know, or you have another husband, then you have to get out there and work. So there wasn't the sort of support in the way there is now if you were to lose a partner. So she had, originally 4 children.
Wow.
And that's why she went into service for Woods Rogers. So I imagine, you know, I think actually I know her husband worked on ships and for Woods Rogers, and that's how she ends up going into service for him.
Wow.
I like that backstory.
Yeah, and away from her children. So she ended up having 3 in the end. And if you remember the last scene
so beautiful.
But only 3 children there. So I think that I can't remember. And also when she was talking about David's birthday, I think somehow at that point we decided that she only had 3 children, even though she had originally had 4, because there was a scene which was cut from it where she does say she's had 4 children, right? And the introduction of Mrs. Hudson. So from that, and we were worried that we were sort of locked into her having 4 children, but actually no, 3 was fine.
3 worked just fine, especially, I guess, because that scene was cut because we had no idea there should have been more than those 3.
More would be greedy.
And I think another aspect of that, there's many, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like you managed in not that many scenes in the last 2 seasons, and not as many scenes as many of the characters had, to have to cover a lot of both emotional and plot ground.
Yes.
Yeah. Did a lot of plot.
Pulling a lot of threads together. Yes.
They're like, bring in Mrs. Hudson. We need something to happen now.
yeah. And I'll tell you what that will be. and I'll put it all together. I think, that the character sort of evolved. So when John first talked to me about it, the way he described her, so you remember in Deadwood, Sarah Paulson's character? Mm-hmm. I can't remember the name of the character because I haven't watched it all, but do you know which one I mean?
I just rewatched it so I could watch the movie, but yes, she's the
right girl. Yeah.
So that was a sort of idea, sort of character. And in my head, she was a bit like a Mrs. Danvers type character. So I had initially come to it thinking she was very hard because of her circumstances. It had made her hard, but obviously at the same time a mother, and there was a softness to you, but you have to get through a lot to get to that. So those initial scenes with Eleanor
are fun, very satisfying.
Fun, yeah, but really like even though she's the one in service, putting her in her place, if that makes sense, in a sense of a hierarchy kind of thing, of not in a sort of social hierarchy, but in a sense of like, I'm older, I've been there, and this is, and this is the way it is. And I'm not going to put up with the any kind of, whims and expectations because she can in that sense. But over the time, she softens, and then she comes to care for Eleanor in a different way. And that was how I found the character to change as well. And so initially my hair was very tightly pulled back, and I don't know if you noticed it, as we go, let her have a curl here and a curl here, just one maybe, but just to make her, just to show that she's softening and becoming more vulnerable. So that was a big progression, and obviously we didn't know where, so she becomes the heart of that emotional situation and journey.
Yes.
Which wasn't what I didn't see that coming, and it just obviously as the writing goes on, you go, okay, you can see what they're trying to do with the character and how they want her to play within that, and then ultimately having her children, and then having that whole storyline around her being separated from her children and having her son's birthday and being away from them, and knowing that that's all she wants is to be able to go back to them. So that changed, and that was really interesting. So that gave a whole different world and life to Mrs. Hudson, which initially when we'd started, I didn't know was coming up. So you kind of, you play it for what you have and for what John and I discussed. And I really enjoyed the progression, the different, but I did find what was interesting for me as an actor was to play a character where it wasn't anything to do, and this is what happens to actresses as they get older, is that hopefully it becomes less about what you look like. And it was great for me to put all my hair back, very little makeup, and make it much more, I suppose, character, in a way. And so that was, and that's quite, I haven't often been asked to play character parts, and that's something that will come as I get older, which is great because actually they're much more interesting. You get to, So that was a big change for me. I didn't have to worry about whether everything was like, have a mirror, check my makeup before they, because it wasn't about that. Really refreshing. Thank God, here we go. It's great. That's just a change, and I kind of embrace that, because then people stop. It's not about that. It's about what you're doing. And that's quite hard for a lot of actresses to be able to surpass that, because you're under so much scrutiny always about how you look like, what size you are, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, it's sort of kind of like okay, this is a different point in our lives, and that you can let go of that, which is quite nice.
Yes, there can be freedom there, sure.
Well, not have to, not get a few more wrinkles, and that's okay. And, because the idea of sort of messing with your face in order to try and preserve something, some kind of 35-year-old look. It's like, well, what's the point? They're going to employ 35-year-olds, and then you just don't look your age. And actually, it's crazy. But living in Los Angeles at the moment, you see it a lot.
I'm sure.
So it's and I suppose it's also refreshing in the way the industry is changing. That actually, directors and producers are looking for people who look real.
Yeah.
in the way that they weren't necessarily before.
Oh, interesting. Of course they are. Yeah.
So Mad Men, I believe, and I believe, and I don't know if this is true, but I had heard that when they were looking to cast, that they wanted to find actors who hadn't had Botox, hadn't done work, because then they would look like they were in the 50s, as you know.
Right. Where people
were
allowed to just age.
Yeah, and beautifully.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, sorry, we've segued there.
No,
That's
that's all
lovely.
very interesting. And it does tie in, I think, to kind of the core of what was happening with Mrs. Hudson, is that on so many levels, like not just what I said about civilization and class, but on so many levels, I feel like Mrs. Hudson inserted a type of femininity that we hadn't seen in the show before. Like there's just, there are a lot, there's a lot of talk about the characters and their parents, but there are no children. I think as Zach McGowan said in his interview, like at some point John said, no pirate babies. Like there are no children.
Absolutely. And the babies will be a bore. That's
babies would be also problematic, just like because someone like me gets like real, as much as I can handle pretty much everything that happened violence wise in the show, the minute it's like violence and there's children involved, it's just becomes a whole different kind of story.
Absolutely.
And so there's that as well. Like I just feel like Mrs. Hudson, in addition to being kind of not of the categories of characters that already were there, the other interesting thing is that Mrs. Hudson in a way becomes a witness, almost to the point of audience surrogate, I think sometimes, like becomes a witness to the behaviors, to the actions, like especially in season 4, Mrs. Hudson becomes the witness to what Woodes Rogers is doing and these choices that he's making. And I always felt like it was very satisfying to me, because I felt like your character was like the only person in the room who was like kind of calling him on his shit a little bit, and like in a way that we as audience all were doing.
Absolutely. She does. Absolutely right. She does become the kind of moral conscience in a world where a lot of what is going on is self-serving and to survive. And she still, of course, wants to survive, but I suppose she's able to somehow do it from the protection of Woodes Rogers, oddly enough. But, because he is the one protecting her. But at the same time, she feels a greater need to also protect this girl.
Yeah.
And that that could come from the fact that, from her being widowed and having her own children, and knowing that, what it is to carry a child, what it is to be a mother, and then Eleanor is carrying this child. And so there's something else that kicks in there. Yeah.
I was watching this morning, in fact, when Mrs. Hudson comes in, because she's listening outside the door and finds out about the plan with the gold. And there's the whole so now I'm forced to make this decision and tell you. Beautiful scene, really gorgeously done. That was really arresting. So, and I think that was the huge turning point for the character and for how I started to see Mrs. Hudson, I suppose. God, that was beautifully done.
That was Alex Sakharov who directed that episode, and he's a lovely director to work with actors. He's really fantastic, and so he was really able to give me the space to do what I can do, because that's what you want is and you don't always get it, because each director has their kind of forte, whatever they're good at, and obviously depending on what episode they're shooting, they'll get a director that will work well for that. But Alec was very good at the storytelling and allowing actors to breathe and knowing how to get it. So not being afraid of having a long shot on something and holding it, and not feeling the need to cut in, and sort of, just let the actor do their work. So how lucky was I to have that in that episode, and just to let me do what I do, and he gave great notes, and actually I had, and Luke, who I've worked with before, we did a show together in England previously, so that so it was nice to have him there and to sort of, know that we know how to work together.
Yeah.
which is good.
Oh,
Yeah, I
that's
suppose
neat.
that really easily could have been super rushed and just like, here's some plot, here's some exposition, so just spit this line
Exactly.
out and then enter, exit, it'll be fine. And there was so much room to, I mean, because we even got like the flashback shots there to your children, and it was very heavy, and it just made everything, it raised the stakes so much of everything that was happening. It was really gorgeous.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry. I think I've got the wrong scene there. So
No, I'm
So
sorry.
I'm thinking about the scene. So it's the scenes in series 3. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
That's what.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Go
right.
on.
You're talking. I know which one you're talking about. Okay, you're talking about.
I listen at a door a lot in the show. So which listening at the door?
Of course, yeah.
Which one? Okay. Mrs. Hudson
this is when we
is
first
constantly eavesdropping.
That is true. We need her
this
for
is
that, though, so that's okay.
Okay, so this is the other one.
I suppose so.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No, the other scene. Okay. Okay, now you're all confused as well.
No, because I'm thinking, right, well, I know that he directed, what is it? He directed it because Toby Schmitz talked to us about working. I mean, I know he directed more than one episode, but it was the second episode of season 4. Is that the one you all are thinking? I'm trying to think which scene.
No, I think that's
Liz
the one
was
that you're thinking of, Liz. I'm thinking of season 3. I think it's about episode 5 or 6. I can't remember when.
Oh, you're thinking about what I'm thinking about when Eleanor and Woods Rogers are like going,
yeah,
like,
and they've
holy
got
shit,
the big
we have
chest
this.
yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right.
The arc. Yeah.
They're like, oh, look, everything's solved. Except,
Yes.
and that's what's so great about for you to have that space to do that scene properly, because it would have been so easy for everyone to just be like, okay, everything's working. Jack and Anne are getting away, and Max is good at, like, everything's going to work for everyone. And basically, so Mrs. Hudson was like, oh, sorry. It looked like everything's going to go well for everyone. But no.
Yes.
And the fact that you got to play that so sympathetically is very important, because we needed to not hate Mrs. Hudson for being like, the person who fly in the ointment that ruins everything.
Yes. Yeah. and also, she's quite, as in that beginning when you first meet, she's quite sort of tightly bound, and she's, a bit uptight, and, and I wanted to play her that way because I don't mind. I don't worry as an actor about being likable, if that makes sense, because I don't always think it's, I think it's often can be a mistake, as if you're worried about whether people will like the character or not. I think the question is, do I like her? If I like her, then that's, and I could find a lot of empathy for someone like that, and why they might be sort of quite tightly bound and prim. And, you have to be, in a world like that, you've kind of got to, this is my respectability. I'm going to hold on to it, especially, in this world, where she's sort of surrounded by, a lot of women who, especially, you've got the brothel, and, she's kind of got to hold her respectability together. Like, this is my line. And then as she gets to know the situation better, she can be a bit more relaxed, or soften.
Well, and I think you're maintaining that made season 4 work so much better, because like I always do. I still, for all these interviews, I still have this problem with the you or she. When you, as she, walk out of the fort and have to go like that. I mean, I feel like it almost like it snuck up on me. Like it was like, I was just like, oh, I'm so worried for her now. It was just like, I was,
Well, she's got a lot at stake, doesn't she? It's her personal.
Well, just literally terrifying.
Yeah, but I mean, that was a fabulous scene to shoot. Have to be brave to go and do that. Mrs. Hudson had to be tremendously brave. And of course, you know that her at that point, all she wants to do is get home to her children. Of course, we hope the audience is rooting for her to get home to her children as well,
certainly.
And to have to go and do that. But it was, I remember when we were shooting at the opening of the door and then going out into that vast space and all, and taking that walk down. It was like that
just
weight
looked so vulnerable.
But also that weight of responsibility and kind of like, I'm okay. Again, the front, I can do this, because I can't show them that I'm frightened.
Right.
A woman in this situation
Wow.
The type, I have to...
With just a heap of pirates outside.
Yeah, in my shoes that wobble on the sand. Can you imagine, it's like you've got to go out there, it's a boiling heat, you've got these shoes, you've got to keep, strong and poised.
Yes.
And it was interesting to do. And I really enjoyed it. And then I did they show, I'm trying to remember, when we got in the boat rowing across, did they show that? I remember it being...
I believe so.
Wonderful to shoot. I'm trying to. I mean, it's a while ago now.
Right.
Okay.
Because you remember shooting it, and then you remember did they actually show it when they put her in the rowboat and to go out there? That was also,
yes, and then the climbing up.
I remember. Yes,
and we talked quite a bit about that because you climbed up and got over, and Woodes Rogers was like immediately manhandling.
Well, I know,
Mrs.
and
Hudson.
I remember that sort of thing of grabbing her, and I remember when we shot that. We talked about, Luke and I talked about how he would grab her and the kind of indignation of being handled in that way.
We were also in the podcast officially full of indignation as well.
Officially indignant on your behalf. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And was it appropriate? Because of course, she's. I think Mrs. Hudson's quite a proud woman.
Definitely.
And even though she's in service, she still has her sense of integrity and pride and self-worth. And I think that's how she survived as well, knowing that, having to have gone into service.
Yes.
And then to know that she's right and she has to advocate for this woman and that she's doing the right thing. And I suppose she's also trying to appeal to his better nature, which he probably knows to be there. But he, by that stage, is so far kind of entrenched in his jealousy, his sort of mania. Ego, narcissism, whatever you want to call it.
We had a lot of things to say about him back then when we covered
that. So funny. Oh,
beautifully done.
Yeah. No, and it was great. And it's true. I mean, you really do, through every stage of Mrs. Hudson, the sassy maid, and then Mrs. Hudson, the reluctant spy, and then Mrs. Hudson, the advocate for Eleanor, which was just so beautiful. But then even through to, and then standing up to Woodes Rogers, and then to possibly one of my favorite parts, which is at the very end when Mrs. Hudson goes to the brothel and talks to Mrs. Mapleton. But you manage. Yeah, let's talk about that. I just wanted to compliment you by saying that you did manage to always, even though she kind of had hard and soft moments and a little bit of both, like you did, that sense of dignity of her always being aware of her own sense of dignity is very striking.
Yeah. I imagine when you're in that, how do you survive? How do you survive those situations? And either your morality is up for grabs, and as many characters will, in order to survive, or you have a sense of sureness and safety within that, knowing that in order to survive, I think probably personally, in a sense, or mentally, you need to hold on to what you know to be right and wrong. It's interesting, isn't it? You think about today where, how the world's changing so much, and what we grew up knowing to be right and wrong in the sense of our understanding of the way we're sort of taught. What is right and wrong? That seems to be changing. It's up for grabs now, if that makes sense. And I said to my own children, I said, it's so important that you hold on to that and know what side of the fence you are on, in the sense of your moral integrity, because the sand is shifting. And you may find that you, as you get older, will be sometimes maybe the only person who feels that, because it's shifted so far. So you need to really hold on to that and decide what is right and wrong for you inside, and where your line is and where you're willing to go with it, because otherwise where are we with humanity in this sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It does. Yeah. It's a difficult thing to teach.
Well, it is, but I think it is, and I think we can go either way with it. People are that's up for grabs for some people, and for some people it's not. And my point is that I think for Mrs. Hudson, that's not up for grabs.
Right.
That kind of line of she can lie, of course, and she's had to in order to protect, but the kind of sense of like that core inner strength and knowing, what she has to do to survive, but also what she's not willing to do to survive is sort of who I think that's how I imagined her.
She has an ethical core that I think, I'm not, I love a lot of the characters, but I don't think that what motivated most of them is a place of ethics.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. They have a lot of things that motivate them, but that's not really it. And that also, again, makes her this interesting outsider.
Well, exactly. And I think that's sort of what she took with her. And brought to that part. Anyway, that's how I imagined it. Mm-hmm. Which you're right, is it gives a different kind of caliber of character. You're like, oh, okay. This is, you feel safe with her, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And she makes all of us, because, she came in the third season when we as viewers have, and I think Black Sails does this really well in a lot of ways, like lets you kind of settle into the moral ambiguities of the world and who we're rooting for and things like that. And then will always kind of, poke us on the shoulder and remind us that,
which is what's so. Yeah.
Right. Maybe we shouldn't be quite so comfortable with these things we've now gotten comfortable
yes,
with.
But that's what you stop seeing Nassau is so different from England. And then you get Mrs. Hudson here, and she is just this strong sense of what reality is on the other side of the ocean, like how things really are without the flashbacks. She's like...
Well, probably that very British kind of sense of propriety.
Very civil, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and civilization as a person. That's the thing, is it's so easy for the show to have demonized civilization and for us to get into this place where pirates good, England bad.
We're all anarchists and burn it on the ground. Well, wait a minute.
Right. And so to have a person who is this kind of fish out of water and and in the language of the show, they're kind of the giants, and Mrs. Hudson he's just a person. She's just a regular person who's suddenly thrown into this situation with these giant historical / literary characters that are all a bit larger than life. And it is this fascinating thing to see you portray this character who's holding her own pretty well in that. Certainly vulnerable
and learning how to, having to step up. Don't you love? I love at the end of it, when she's reading her children's story.
Oh my God!
That
was the perfect.
And she wrote
perfect.
The idea is that who wrote Treasure Island? Maybe it was Mrs. Hudson.
Maybe.
Or The Observer. Did you get that?
I like that theory. That is a good theory.
I don't think I did. I love that.
Well, the book she's reading is Treasure Island.
Is Treasure Island.
Yeah.
I love that.
And the idea is that because she's observed all of this, is that
she would be the perfect person.
Who's the writer?
Oh, right. Gorgeous. Yeah. Wow, I love that.
Yeah.
I really love that.
And
that's great.
The story she tells her children.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
When she's back home.
Goodness.
That was actually lovely, because I'm sure you know that they were our children.
Yeah, we do know that.
I had forgotten that. No, that's a piece of trivia that I had.
Well, I had actually never wanted anyone to know that, but somehow.
Somehow.
Right. I'm so sorry. I don't know who told. One of the actors told us.
No,
I'm
fine,
so sorry.
It's fine. No, it doesn't matter.
We'll blame Luke. It was Luke Arnold. It was absolutely Luke Arnold.
We'll blame him.
Yeah,
he can carry it.
But I remember my son was very good and absolutely determined that the girls did not look down the camera. Don't look down the camera. And he was being, he's like, I've done my drama classes. I know what to do. And of course, my middle child, the moment the camera came in, he went, she's straight down the lens. And I remember Dan Schott saying to me, what can I buy you not to move down the lens? And she was like, oh, wow.
Wow.
But I they had a great time doing it, and obviously loved the costumes, having their hair done, but then of course all the waiting around. And up until that point, you'd said to them, what do you want to do? And they went, oh, we want to be actors. But by the end of it, they went, that was so boring. was like, yes, my job is done.
Excellent. You trained them out of that quickly. Well
Absolutely.
done.
Yeah. One day on set and they're done.
That's fabulous. Well,
Yeah.
it is
No,
one of the most satisfying images at the end of the
Yes,
episode. It is wonderful.
absolutely.
So,
No, it was
we
lovely.
thank your children for suffering through it.
No, I think,
and Dan for bribing one of them. So yeah, let's talk about, I interrupted you during this. Let's talk about the meeting with Mapleton, because I feel like that is kind of the apex, because it's like, that is where Mrs. Hudson really leaves. Even though she went to Cuba with Woodes Rogers, I feel like in many levels going into the brothel was actually the apex of her leaving her comfort zone.
But also it was, this is where you get to women talking. So it's not younger girls, this is two women face to face, having it
been
out.
through some stuff.
Sense. Been through some stuff and, at different ages again, but still at that point in their lives where they've been through it, they've kind of, there's a different energy to it. And, it felt quite powerful. It felt quite a powerful negotiation, if that makes sense.
It was. It was excellent.
Yeah. And we, I loved that scene, and that was Uta who filmed that series.
Oh gosh, her episode is so good.
Yeah, our one and only female director, and she was amazing, amazing. So we were lucky to have her, and again, she understood what that was. She knew what that required, and that it was two power brokers. What can we get out of this, and who, and who
came from
number.
Such different places in the in the spectrum of being willing to be motivated by things other than things. I mean, that's what's fascinating. Is Mapleton becomes a very sympathetic character by the end, but she is absolutely a wheeler and a dealer without without an ethical center.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Mrs. Hudson coming into the brothel, you see lots of naked women running, going, okay, I'm okay with this. And also she has to make sure Mapleton knows I can deal with this. Of course she's probably, she's thinking, okay, this is way outside my comfort zone, but, I have to show that I'm okay with it, that I'm, I've got this,
right.
So that I can actually, negotiate and say what I need to say, and for you to take me seriously.
Right.
So I mean, I loved filming that scene. It was great, and she's a lovely actress to work with.
Fabulous.
You loved Mapleton, to watch anyway. Yes.
Always she's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, they were really lucky. Actually, had some amazing South African actors that they were able to find. I'm trying to think what else happened in that episode. And
the diary.
Yes, it's exactly what I was thinking about, the diary, and then folding away the clothes and putting them.
Oh God, that still breaks my heart. That still breaks. All you have to do is say that, and it still breaks my heart.
I forgot. Yes.
Yeah.
So I actually have a question about that. We talked quite a bit about it. How it was very interesting that the clothing that you were folding was Eleanor's pre-season 3 clothing. It was the clothing of who Eleanor was,
right. I remember
not who she had become.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking them out of her drawer and folding them away, and yeah.
I remember we talked about that. And it felt like Mrs. Hudson was honoring the person Eleanor was right when she met her, which she even wasn't already, but for viewers, the process of watching Eleanor go from the way she dressed in seasons 1 and seasons 2 to her variant in season 3, and then season 4 even more so, of watching her go from wearing these very Eleanor specific, feminine, but also kind of piratical, so right? There was just this very specific way of dressing. And then in seasons 3 and 4, she's dressing much more the way we would expect women in that period to be dressing. And so it felt like this beautiful moment of respect for the person Eleanor really was, which I think is a big part of season 4, is that Woodes Rogers refused to understand Ellen.
The journey that she'd come on. And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And whereas you got to have that speech, I know that there were quite a few. I mean, I think Hannah actually did talk about a cut scene. Like, I know that there were quite a few cut scenes. Like, but one of the scenes that is amazing is the one where Mrs. Hudson gets to tell Eleanor how much she respects her.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the way it goes. When you write scripts, they're inevitably going to be too long. And then in terms of storytelling, you have to essentialize things. And so, you have scenes. There was actually a lovely scene in season 3 where I'm putting on her corset, I'm dressing her. And that was very telling in of the kind of her opinion of Eleanor, which was not very low, really. Mrs. Hudson sort of sees her as a woman who trades on her sexuality in order to get what she wants. Yeah. And, is very dismissive of that. And she's doing up her corset at the same time and, saying, you need to get dressed properly. Yeah. Because she hasn't worn a corset. But that's the change from that moment is into like, right, Wood Roger's is going to put her in a corset and sort of strap her up and make her sort of, more of what it is to be appropriate.
Right.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? Men appropriating women. This is how you should become.
Yep.
But what's interesting is she does it. She becomes that. She takes that on. But she goes beyond that. So she goes, okay, and I can do that. But then with that comes my, my ability to also think independently. She always has been an independent thinker, but obviously my, even though I'm doing that, I'm not subjugating myself to your whims. I still have my own opinion and I'm willing to go to the end with it, which she does,
Right. Well, and I think, she's always aware of something that, I've always felt is true with Max, and Eleanor's the one who says it explicitly, is like, basically, I am wearing a costume. Like, I am playing a role that that we have agreed that for me to play it gives you and thereby me power. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that it is a costume, that it is a choice to be made, which is really, I just feel like, the show does a lot of that with the female characters, a lot of like Definitely. The choices that you make vis-a-vis femininity. Mm-hmm.
Well, so yes, exactly. So for example, with Mrs. Hudson, so a lot of the female characters would have like a corset, they would be lower cut than mine, and a lot of them didn't have, which I had, was like a little blouse underneath. I don't know if you noticed, the little buttoned up. Yep. So that was, beautifully done, but so I would have that blouse, and the tighter the corset, the better. But there was no kind of sense of needing to create any cleavage. That's fine, because in fact it would be totally inappropriate. Does that make sense? So all my dresses were cut up a lot higher, and they had those little chemise underneath, which were beautiful. But we talked about that cover. We talked about the idea behind that would be, because she was so pale skinned, was to deal with the sun. So it's almost like her sort of sun protection.
Yes, sure.
Which is lovely, whereas the rest of them have been used to being out in the sun all the time. They're not thinking about it. But she, coming from England, is very aware of the sun.
Yeah, of course.
I remember one day when we were shooting on the one of the boats, and I'm talking about my son, and it's his 5th birthday, and the sun is just so hot that day, and we're we've got the sun. It was unbearable. But I remember.
I can imagine in other costumes.
Well, and other days it was fine, but sometimes it was quite intense, and you were like, it's a lot, and it would have been the same at the time. There was a lovely scene which is not in the episodes, which is on the front of the bow, actually right at the beginning of, and this is where I say I have 4 children, right at the beginning of series 3. And I talk about who my husband was, and he was a quartermaster, and that I had 4 children. But I don't know why that didn't end up in there. Anyway, didn't. But it was a lovely scene.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Wait, but I had another question about Mrs. Hudson, or like statement that I could maybe get you to talk about.
Sure.
Another interesting thing to me about Mrs. Hudson is that unlike most of the women in the story of Black Sails, Mrs. Hudson interacts a lot with women. And that was part of what was interesting to me about the fact that she went to Mapleton, is that, we talked quite a bit, especially in the first two seasons, and especially in relation to Miranda, like how much the women all live in isolation and are all, like, each one of them interacting with men, but like not really building coalitions with each other. And then it becomes very striking when they do. Like Eleanor and Max start out together, and then Max and Anne end up having their period together. But it's interesting that Mrs. Hudson, again, I think even the thing you even said about the chemise, I think that everything really always points to Mrs. Hudson as someone who just came from a different place, like just this outsider status. And I feel like
who never really assimilates in the way that people do.
No, right. And if you think there's a scene in series 3 where Eleanor, Max, and Mrs. Hudson are all embroidering.
Yes.
It's the only domestic scene, in the sense of domestic kind of the day scene that you have them. You never see them cooking, you never see them, cleaning, doing laundry or anything like that. But that's the moment that you see them doing something domestic at the time.
And feminine.
And there's something so sort of restrained and dainty and polite about it. But there's also the gossiping, they're talking, and they're sharing stories. And Mrs. Hudson's listening in to that. And, and that I thought was an interesting thing to include, have just a little moment of that. So that, what would they have done in their spare time? What would they have? I don't know. I think perhaps it was probably Mrs. Hudson who suggested that they all sit down and do some embroidery.
That sounds right. Yes.
Keep out of the sun.
A strong cup of tea.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think Max was not partaking, which is also very appropriate.
Exactly. She's there. And I was also thinking about the scene where Mrs. Hudson talks about telling Eleanor that she knows she's pregnant.
Yes.
It was a very kind of intensely, private and intimate scene for Hannah and I to shoot together, and getting the right sort of levels of intimacy, but also appropriateness for, not overstepping the mark, and knowing, because of course, whilst she has a care and a concern for her, there is also she is the wife of the boss.
Yes.
Right.
And knowing that she can't overstep. It's almost like in the same way that she deals with Woodes Rogers. How much can I get away with? How much can I say? It's like, how much can I say in an appropriate, polite way and be able to say it without getting, and get away with it without getting, into trouble, or sort of like, but she's always
even to gain their respect, I think, too. Yeah. She's kind of like a governess in some of the other novels, where it's like neither in
she is that for Eleanor, because Eleanor never had a mother.
Mrs. Danvers, but nicer.
Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
No, it's true, because Eleanor didn't have a mother figure, so there's that as well. Like,
so she
literally didn't have someone who would explain to her, like, you're
pregnant, girl.
Right. Other women will know if you're pregnant, especially if they're in charge of your clothing and your sheets.
You don't know what I do, and you are. Because she's like, I wash your clothes, I know,
right.
And of course, and those kind of things, I suppose also, at the time, we knew how so intimately, women knew how intimate, especially if you're working in that way, you would know how intimately other women's bodies worked, and you'd have to know that, and you'd be on the lookout for it, and that would be your job,
right,
to know that,
and
to understand that,
right, to prepare for it,
you actually wouldn't have had, and you imagine the brothel, the same thing. I mean, we don't talk about it, but of course that's all going on. You didn't have the kind of ability to just, in the way one does now. It's like your own private business. You deal with it.
There is no privacy.
This is a communal. It's a communal. This is our femaleness, and we're doing this together. And so that's of course also going on there as well.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. I mean,
which I think the show managed to get more of as it went on, and to have an understanding of, if that makes sense. I mean, it's not that, but there was a closer kind of, especially, you know, the relationship with Anne Bonny and Eleanor and Max, and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the show, I mean, I have an episode where I say that the show does shift towards women, which is 106.
Yeah.
And then I think that as the show goes on, it more and more incorporates the point of view of the female characters, like just more and more and more. And I think that actually the introduction of Mrs. Hudson is a big part of that, like this idea that bringing in a female character who really is going to make us think a little differently about what we're seeing. I just think,
and who comes out swinging too.
So yeah, I mean, look, that was you know, thanks to John and Robert when they were writing, they were like, okay, you know, it brings a whole different flavor. It's just a grown-up woman, and you know. And she's not running a brothel.
Right.
So, you know, so it's a different, you know, so actually what it does is it shows women in all, because, you know, one has to be aware if you know, you don't want to show women in sort of one kind of dimension. You want to sort of, you know, give it a broader, and the men were certainly represented in a broader way. So it's really smart that they brought that character in to say, look, you know, it needs this element of it as well, to make it, sort of more human, and to have some kind of, you know, I'm trying to think of the right word, really. I suppose it's sort of, as you say, it's like a viewpoint on these characters, but from a sort of more of an audience perspective.
Right.
And that's, you know, and she observes. I mean, she's always listening at the door. I mean, I must have eavesdropped at how many doors getting this, you know.
Sure.
And then the scene also with the Spanish, you know, she has her Spanish, because when they asked me to do it, the role, they talked about her being a spy as well. So right from the get-go, she was a spy.
Okay, I was going to ask you that question, if you knew that straight up.
Right from the get-go, and had been employed by the Spanish, and because they threatened her children, obviously, and that's how they got her involved, because she was working for Woods Rogers, and they said, right, this is what you need to do, and they were going to kill her children unless she did it. So she was a spy right from the get-go, under duress, you know, sure. Yes. But that's how she got involved. And then having to go, right, how do I negotiate this? I obviously know it's wrong, and I have, and this man has given me a job, looked after me when my husband died. Right. I have I owe my life and my children's life to this man who will support us. Because, you know, much more difficult for women then. You know, you could literally be in the poorhouse. You know, there's no one to pick up the pieces, and much tougher for women in those days. You know, to survive, you either had to marry again very quickly, but who, you know, at the time, I imagine, you know, if you don't have any money or a dowry, who wants to marry someone with 4 children? Right. So, or you have to go out and go into service, and that's what a lot of women did if they didn't get married. They would go as governess and go and exactly, and then of course they can't bring their children with them, and then you know, but that happens still today with lots of communities. The women go away and work, and they support the children. So it's, you know, we're just
absolutely
lucky.
True.
Yeah.
Yep.
Slightly, we segued again.
There is nothing wrong with that. We love to talk about how stuff in Black Sails is relevant to life, because it is, even though it feels like this story so removed from our reality, that's what's beautiful about it, is that it really isn't.
No, and that's what they're so great at writing. And they make it. They you know, you have a story and then you kind of pull out, and what does it mean in terms of, you know, it was so interesting. I remember they were doing that photo shoot for how was it, which is the one, they're burning the British flag, which is the cover, is that season 2? And they're burning the British flag.
Season 3.
Season 3, I think.
I have the gigantic poster.
So I remember they were doing the photo shoot for that, and I don't think I wasn't involved with the show at that point. I think I was I'd come down to Cape Town. I can't remember. I'd come down to Cape Town, and I was there watching them shoot it. And prior to that, I had been in England, and I had gone to a dinner held for Toby's mum for her 80th birthday with 3 other actors who were all turning 80 that year, given by Prince Charles.
Oh, goodness.
At Clarence House. I know. And
wait, we should maybe officially say, we did not say, and not everyone knows who you're married to.
Oh no, well that's fine. Okay. Not everyone does know. Okay. I always expect everyone does know.
No, not all of our listeners know who you're married to. So when you say Toby's mom, you mean?
Yeah. There you go. That's something you can all go and figure that out, because I don't want to.
Everyone go figure that out. Just the internet is waiting for you. Figure out who Anna-Louise is married to.
Impact the story.
Okay, so you're at a dinner.
Yeah, so it's a sit-down dinner for very intimate, like 25 people, and I know, very lucky to be invited. Toby couldn't go, obviously, because he was shooting, and it was a shame. And when I'm introduced to Prince Charles, he says, "Where is Toby?" And I said, "Oh, well, now I've blown it, haven't I?"
It's all right. It's all right.
And I said, "Oh, he's shooting in Cape Town. He's doing a show there." And he said, "Oh, really? What show is he doing?" And I said, "It's a show called Black Sails." And he said, "Oh, really? Is it on the television?" I said, "No." I said, "You'd have to get that online." He said, "Well, I can't really do that." And I went, "Right, you'll have to get someone to go to HMV for you then." So I was then at this photo shoot for and watching Toby doing the burning of the British flag, and I was speaking to the publicity department. I said, "Oh, it would be lovely if you could send this to Prince Charles." So they did. They sent him a copy, but I was very grateful that it was only season 1 and 2, because they are burning the British flag.
I know. I was going to say it's nothing like.
It was like a holograph on the.
I know. Well,
I set that I had.
I have no idea whether I thought we could give it to the boys, maybe, even if it's not in his bag. But
hilarious.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, gosh, lucky it wasn't season 3 that they said. But anyway,
that is very, very funny.
Yeah. Sweet. So what other little insights can I give you into Mrs. Hudson? I think they had beautiful costumes. I think I found playing her, was a lot of the time, it was always very, I spent a lot of time thinking that she had to carefully manage everything she said. Mrs. Hudson managed, she was a manager, if that makes sense, of her emotions, the situation. She was having to manage appropriateness, her station, in the sense of, her boss. Everything is like, okay, how do I negotiate and manage this situation? There was no opportunity for her to just go, "This is me," and that's why that scene with her children is so lovely, because that is her in a relaxed, her hair is down in a way. It's more kind of, she's with her children, legs up on the bed, and it's and that's her, but everything else is very much a facade of how she survives.
Yes, it's there in the body language very much. I
remember thinking that it was very upright,
yes,
and stiff.
Yes, stiff. Yes. I always think of her almost as like a cutout silhouette. Like when I'm just thinking of her in my mind, she's got just the carriage, and even how your arms were always like out and held back, like posing for a picture.
Yeah,
really
I was really conscious of that.
Yes.
I made sure she had a real kind of stature and poise, and which made her very different to everyone else. There wasn't a freedom in her body. She wasn't able to do that. She was not free. Mrs. Hudson's not a free woman, and she became. And she was, and when her husband died, she stopped being free, if that makes sense, because she then had to go. So. And I also think, it's just the way a lot of women, all of these other women have been in Nassau. They're able to, whereas if you come from that society, there's nothing free about it. Even we're taught to sort of behave a certain way, sit a certain way. And so I was very conscious of that when and I approach my work through, I like to think of physically how they are. And that often gives the motor from the inside. A lot of actors work from the inside out. If I don't know what that is, or I'm not sure what that is, I try and find a physicality to the character. And then with that comes an interior. Does that make sense? How do I feel when I'm like that? So the motor of what drives the character comes from some, from sometimes I create the outside and and then I get the motor on the inside, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting, especially like if you think about like, now I'm thinking about what you did with your posture and your body in seasons 3 and 4. And then if you look at what Louise did with Miranda in seasons 1 and 2, is that she had an uprightness and a propriety that the Nassau women didn't use in their bodies, but also a fluidity that, because even though Miranda was miserable and not in a great position, she had come from such a different place that she had this, she had this sense of, I think, of security, even though her life is, had been turned upside down, both because of class and also because she knew that deep down nobody was going to hurt her because of Flint. So she lived in Nassau. She was very upright, but again, she just had this like comfort in her body that was like I felt like as much as her London self and her Nassau self were different,
very different.
That was the fluidity of movement was something that both versions had, and so that's a kind of interesting contrast too. I'm sure you weren't thinking about what Louise had done, but it is just like for the outsider, it's very interesting to think about that kind of like sense of like being comfortable in her skin, even though she was an outsider, versus what you did with Mrs. Hudson, with this sense of like, you never looked like you were comfortable in your skin because you were constantly.
She wasn't allowed to be. She couldn't be. You can't let your guard down. You can't. I think also, you put a corset on. It's why often in rehearsals, I if I'm doing theatre and I'm in it, that I will rehearse in a corset just because it helps you, gives you a sense. I don't need to, because we were really lucky that we had rehearsal time on this show. Really lucky. But I didn't rehearse in a corset for that because that was more about just the technically working out of it. Because the moment, it's a different kind of thing doing film to theatre. So, but it immediately gives you that kind of changes the way you move, and as an actor, immediately the costume gives you so much already, and it's so different from the way we're used to dressing. So that helps, and. You sit in the makeup chair and you sort of create this character. And because it's so different for me, I mean, I like to wear my hair pulled back sometimes, but, to really do that. And I made sure it was really tightly pulled back. And I dyed my hair red for the show because I was blonde,
Oh, sure.
And I remember...
so red, too. Did you make that choice? So it was such red hair.
Yes.
Okay, so what was your thinking?
I wanted her to be like that very Celtic... Like, the uptightness, sort of, I'm sorry, I'm not saying all Celtic people are uptight, but that sort of Scottish puritanical.
I've got you.
I wanted it to be that sort of quite puritanical, reserved, Protestant kind of, I just wanted it, it's that sort of very, I think Protestant is the right word for the time, actually, because it was very tightly bound. You've got the Spanish around, that sort of very kind of exuberant Catholicism and that kind of, although none of that came into the show, of course, that's the way, that's what's going on at the time. You've got the Spanish Wars and, so I wanted her to appear very kind of Lutheran in her kind of, the way that the red hair came from that. And I remember saying, calling John saying, I want to have red hair. Okay, we thought maybe grey. I mean, no grey, not grey, definitely not grey. She's not that old. So I was like, no. And I was just like, there is no way I'm going to be grey yet. And I thought I've got many years of grey hair to come, but I just I wanted her to seem like that. And that's why I came up with that.
That is fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. I think the first time I saw a picture of you afterwards, I was like, wait a minute. She's not a redhead at all.
Not a redhead. But still, I've kept my hair quite red. And my kids are saying, when are you going back to your golden hair, Mummy? And not that I'm a blonde either.
But that's how you like it. That's what you are. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the great thing. Lovely thing about being an actor is that you can sort of try different people on for a bit. And what's so interesting is how people's the way people talk to you and the way they listen to you is totally different depending on what color hair you have. Sometimes I remember when I was blonde for a long time, and then I did a show called Cambridge Spies, and they took me from blonde to dark. And all of a sudden, people started listening to what I had to say. I was like, and I really noticed it. I really noticed the difference.
Yes.
It's like, you taking me seriously, really? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I noticed that.
I've only ever had dark hair, so that's
everyone
the only
takes you seriously.
Yeah. I notice it with clothes. I've not had lighter hair before or blonde hair, at least not in a very long time. But I will notice very much if I'm wearing I love in the summertime to wear a really small little sundress. I just think they're adorable and lovely. But yeah, no one will take you seriously in that. They just don't.
Crazy, isn't it?
It's so strange. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
and amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I suppose and the idea also one's preconception. The idea of a redhead is fiery, temper, but quite sort of strict and uptight. Of course, it's a total, generalization. It's ludicrous, but it
has nothing to do with anything, right?
Exactly. But it immediately says something to people. And when you've got to try and create a character in, a few scenes, and you want people to know exactly who she is, it's quite, those sort of things are quite, very helpful. Go, okay,
right.
No, I know what I'm dealing with here. And then what's so great is then you can unravel that and show something else.
Right. I mean, stereotypes are, kind of a different variation on archetypes. And we respond to them.
Yeah.
Right. Whether we want to or not. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I mean, I suppose, if you look at, Vane, you've got this, you've got immediate sort of, perception of what that might be. And then he, exactly.
And then he subverts it. I mean, that's what's fascinating is I feel like the show does such a, the show does a great job.
You know them and then you don't. But that's life, isn't it? And that's what John and Robert have done so well. It's like you think you know what you're getting. And then they become something entirely different. You're like, oh, it's great.
Yes. Yeah.
And, they write so well as well, they really do. It was we were very lucky to not have to think, God, how am I going to say this? Or how am I going to, and obviously,
what am I going to do with this dialogue?
Yeah. But, what I was really lucky was that, of course, I had to do a lot of plot and exposition. And that is, it's a bit like, but they gave you so much to play within all of that. It made it sort of, sometimes you just get exposition, you just think, oh my God, but this was, there's a lot of, they layered it with so much more. So yes, they're doing what they need to do in order to further the story, but they're giving you some great ways to play it.
Yes.
Yes.
And so much depth to all of the characters.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
just extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed having that whole sort of Spanish Havana section as well.
Sure.
It was so fun.
It was so cool looking. Yeah. We talked to, I guess the only person we've really talked to about that was Lucas Etland, told us a little bit about it.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
And his mom being an extra, he told us about that.
Oh, I know. Bless him. Bless him. Yeah. Actually, Lucas was the director. The scene you were talking about before when I listening at the door, and then I have to explain about Eleanor being pregnant towards Rogers when he didn't know that.
Yes,
that was a Lucas episode, and that was actually it was lovely because that was my sister was on set that day, and it's if you can believe it, the first time one of my family has come to set to see me work.
Wow.
I know.
That's a good day for it.
I know, but I was just like, it's just because my family all live all over the world. None of us live in the same place.
Oh, interesting.
We literally live everywhere. Yeah. So the idea of anyone, actually, I say that I tell a lie. I did a film with Steven Seagal. Yes, I did.
Oh. Okay, which one? I need to watch it. I'm really curious.
My back life, I have done. Okay, I have been the leading woman to Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme. There you go.
Wow.
I know. God knows how I ended up.
So fun.
It is quite hilarious.
Okay, so I have probably seen both of those because I've spent a lot of time in Thailand.
Okay. All right. You probably have. They turn up in the most bizarre places.
Oh, my goodness. I need to watch those.
I mean, I know. So not my genre, but quite funny. So my brother did come to Poland, and I forgot that was a long time ago.
Wow.
But first time my sister had been to set. So that was lovely to have her there. And a really, really powerful scene to have to play with for both, Luca and I, making sure you get all the beats in there. And that moment when the poor man comes in to say the body is ready, and Luke just getting so angry that he kept on knocking on the door at the wrong time. It was like, no. And I was sitting going, not now, not no.
Oh, that's funny. Oh,
that was very funny. No. And it's like, now? And he'd come and say, excuse me. And then he'd go, and they go, no, coming out again. The poor man sort of tentatively opening the door. Now?
That's so good.
Yeah, wow. But that was a great episode to do. I think also she's the sort of keeper of secrets as well. She keeps everyone's secrets, her own secrets, and and chooses when to share them, when to not, and when does and that was the thing of the burden of the lie becomes too much. So that ethical side of her sort of comes out, and she has to kind of tell it in order to make it good. She has to be honest, the unburdening of her soul in order to make good.
Well, and she had been so caught up in this drama between this couple. I mean, the weird thing is that Mrs. Hudson, like for most of season 4, Mrs. Hudson spends more time with Eleanor or Woodes Rogers than either of them spend with each other.
I know.
Which is really pretty. That's part of the problem is that they're not actually communicating with each other. Right. But it's like
she's the go-between.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very uncomfortable place to have to be. Is like the person who's both like not just the person who's like interacting with each half of a couple that's like having a what turns out to be deadly level of misunderstanding, but to also be a servant at the same time, and
and a shift of loyalty as well.
Trying not to die.
Yeah, trying to die on the way because everyone else is. But it's a shift of loyalty. She's going from being loyal to Woodes Rogers to loyal to Eleanor.
Yeah. As we are. I mean, that's a lot of what happens. That's a lot of what happens with the viewer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many layers in it, isn't there? Mm-hmm. So we had a different Juan, I can't even say his name, Hawa, the my Spanish.
Right. Yes, sure.
Yeah,
I used to get hysterical over the name.
Grandal. Isn't his name Grandal?
Grandal. Juan Grandal.
And I went Juan Grandal. And so we had a different one in the first.
Yes.
And actually, I don't know whether you noticed. Do you notice it's a different actor?
Yes.
You did, yeah. Would we like to say that?
I've watched the show a bunch of times
things.
To the point where people,
yeah. I remember they tried to sort of shoot him and sort of say maybe no one will notice, but totally different person.
Right. Yes, totally different. I mean, again, I don't think it's.
Yeah, you get used to watching TV.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
No, I mean it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. The movie
is just fine. A lot of people don't notice these things.
No, I know, and also if people are watching it on their iPhone.
So true. It is. I know.
That's so wrong.
Yeah, miss so much.
Yep.
Yeah, but I suppose it's like if you're sitting on the tube or you're on a plane, and
sure.
At least you can watch it. Mm-hmm. But then then it just becomes all the detail because those sets were so beautiful,
amazing.
So extraordinary. Yes. Well, and Daphne really turned me around when I started listening to the episodes with headphones on.
Yes.
I was like, I can't go back now. There's so much work being done in the sound.
The sound is so good with headphones.
The sound is insane, especially anytime they're on a ship. And you get all the creaking and the
Isn't it amazing?
It's incredible. Yes.
And it's so beautifully layered. It's really, it's so much fun with headphones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get the waves, you get everything. It's incredible.
Yeah. It was because of podcast preparation, because I had seen the show multiple times before we started the podcast. We started the podcast between seasons 3 and 4, but preparing for the podcast, I often would be watching when my daughter's near me and I don't want her watching
course,
or listening,
sure.
or
Yeah,
you know,
course.
or just like,
Sure.
or on a plane, or just, you know. And also, I started watching often with headphones, just because of I needed to rewatch a bunch of times before each episode we covered, and then that was it. Then I was just hooked on it. Like,
And you just can't go back. Yeah,
I know, and I'm always torn
Interesting.
because it's like I love watching it on my television because it is beautiful and should be on a bigger screen, but it's also really fun to watch it on my computer because then I get the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, okay, it's great top tip.
Yeah. Yes.
I was thinking actually it would be really lovely to watch it again, just with a bit of space from it as well. Because there's so many great things in there and so many great, and obviously Toby is fantastic in it.
Yeah.
And
He's pretty good at what he
yes,
does.
he's pretty good. Yeah.
I didn't get to talk to him, and I was just
I
heartbroken.
know. I tried
we
so
waited
hard.
Long. I know you did. We always do. It's all right.
know.
It happens.
Yes.
Yeah,
we've
okay.
been blessed
Curse
by
of
getting
technology.
Yeah, we've been blessed with doing this podcast and cursed sometimes with technology.
Yeah.
Well, it's great that you guys are doing it. It's fantastic.
It's been so much fun for us. It really has been so much fun for us.
So few shows I think deserve this kind of analysis and this kind of unpicking, and it's been such an honor to be able to do it at all. But also to have everybody who was involved have so much to say and so much input, and to shine so many more lights into corners has just been incredible. And for a show especially that was just 4 seasons, which were 4 perfect seasons. I'm not saying that I wish it had been 8 seasons and I had gotten tired of it, because that's what would have happened, I think.
Yeah.
You just start to lose the sense of how important everything is. It's a perfect show, and I think that it deserves this sort of unpicking.
And there's so much detail. I'm just thinking now of the scene when Eleanor comes to Mrs. Hudson's room and you get to see her private quarters. Do you remember that scene?
Vaguely. Yeah, I think so.
She's sitting on her bed and she comes to talk to her because, it's post the scene where she has, said that she has the Spanish... that she's been.
Oh, right. Sure. Yeah. That's when that's right. That's when Mrs. Hudson gets to tell the story of why. Tell the story about the children.
Exactly. But you see her in her domestic quarters and how sort of, again, puritanical and kind of
very severe. Yeah.
Very severe. And I remember saying, I think it'd be great. We could have a cross above the bed and make it. I remember John and me going, no, what are you talking about? I said, it would be really interesting. I said, because then you could have that whole. But what I think is very interesting is they chose to not do any of that and take all of that out, but which is good because it means it could be anywhere. But of course, if you're thinking back at the time, you're thinking about what's going on with the Spanish and the kind of, religious wars and the Crusades and all of that come into it. But I thought it was interesting to see her in her domestic life in that moment in her room and how, this little single bed, the sort of steel or metal bed. And interesting.
They did interesting things with spaces. So many beautiful things with spaces. Yeah. And that taught us so much about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So many subtle cues in all of in the sets, in the costumes.
Mm-hmm.
Ripe for people like us who want to pick apart every little bit of
every little detail.
Yeah.
Wow, that was so much fun listening to all of your stories, and we wanted to know if there's anything else you're working on that our listeners will want to know about.
I just did a couple of the last 2 episodes of The Witcher, which is a new Netflix show, which actually Alex Sakharov asked me to come and do, which he was doing, which I think will be good. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what that part's going to be like, but it was
interesting
fun to do.
But you just made me want to watch.
But it was great to work on it, and and I think it's got such a huge following already through the games.
Yes.
That it was a video game, and then it was actually originally Polish fantasy novels in the 80s, and then and then was a game, and now it's a TV series. So it's got a built-in audience. But I was just in the last 2 episodes of that.
Wow.
So, and then I'm developing my own project at the moment, actually. Yeah,
that's so exciting. Good for you.
Thanks. And John is involved in that with me.
How exciting!
So
fabulous.
So that's exciting. So yeah, fingers crossed,
Wow.
Watch this space. We'll see.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for
Yeah.
you. That's
Thank
thrilling.
you.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I think we're all quite excited about it, so we'll see. Yeah.
Wow.
That is terrific.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. It was so great to meet you.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to meet you too. Lovely to meet you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Deep is a Common Room radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag FathomsDeep and follow us on Twitter at BlackSalesCast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.